The rain gently hit the roof of the small house where Samuel lived with his father, Don Esteban. Since his mother had passed away and gone to the presence of God 10 years ago, the man had done everything possible to raise his son with love and righteousness. However, Samuel had never truly understood his father's sacrifice. "Why are you always so hard on me?" Samuel protested one afternoon after his father asked him to finish his chores before going out with his friends. Don Esteban looked at him patiently, with a gaze full of wisdom and tenderness. "Son, everything I do is for your own good. One day you'll understand." But Samuel didn't want to listen. In his heart, he felt that his father was just preventing him from enjoying life. He saw him as a strict and old-fashioned man, incapable of understanding his dreams and desires, until one day, God showed him the truth in a way he would never forget. The day everything changed started like any other. Samuel woke up late, ignoring his father's calls to help with the farm. Don Esteban, as always, let his son sleep a little longer, knowing that the fatigue of youth sometimes weighs more than responsibility. When Samuel finally woke up, he saw his father in the field under the scorching sun, plowing the land with his own hands. Although age weighed heavily on him, Don Esteban never complained or asked for help. "I don't understand why he keeps doing that," Samuel murmured to himself. He could hire someone and rest a bit, but Don Esteban never wanted to spend on luxuries. Everything he had, he saved for Samuel's future, although his son couldn't see it. That afternoon, after a trivial argument, Samuel exploded. "I wish I had another father, someone who understood me and didn't make me do so many things." The silence that followed was overwhelming. Don Esteban lowered his gaze, hurt, but said nothing. Instead of scolding him, he simply responded calmly, "Son, one day you'll realize how much I love you." And with those words, he walked away, leaving Samuel alone with his anger. That night, Samuel had a dream that would change his life forever. Samuel found himself in a strange place. It was his house, but empty and completely silent. He walked through the hallways calling for his father, but got no response. When he stepped outside into the field, he saw the figure of Don Esteban, but something was different. His face reflected deep weariness, and his body seemed weaker than usual. He tried to get closer, but something stopped him, as if an invisible barrier prevented him from reaching him. Suddenly, a voice echoed in the wind. "Time doesn't wait, son. A father's love is a gift that doesn't last forever on this earth." Samuel felt a lump in his throat. Suddenly, images began to appear before him. His father working late into the night to pay for his education, depriving himself of many things to give him a better life, praying silently for him when he thought he was asleep. Then he saw a scene that shook him. His father in bed, weak and ill, calling for him in a broken voice. But Samuel wasn't there. He realized that in his pride and anger, he had neglected the man who loved him most. "No!" he shouted. "Dad, I'm sorry." At that moment, he woke up with his heart racing and tears in his eyes. Samuel sat up in bed, feeling his heart pounding. He could still hear the echo of the voice in his dream and see the image of his weakened father. He hurriedly got up and left his room. At the kitchen table, Don Esteban was already awake, preparing coffee. His hands, weathered by years of work, trembled slightly as he held the cup. Samuel looked at him with new eyes. For the first time, he noticed how tired he was, the wrinkles on his face, and how his body seemed more fragile than he remembered. "Dad," he said quietly. Don Esteban looked up, surprised. His son rarely called him that with so much emotion. "Is something wrong, son?" he asked gently. Samuel swallowed hard and, moved, approached him. Without saying a word, He hugged him tightly. Don Esteban stood still for a moment before returning the hug with a smile. "Thank you for everything you do for me," Samuel whispered, eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry for not valuing it sooner." Don Esteban smiled warmly and ruffled his hair, just like when he was a child. "I always knew that one day you would understand." That day, Samuel made a decision to cherish every moment with his father and show him how much he loved him before it was too late. From that day on, Samuel began to change. He no longer saw his father as a strict man, but as someone who had loved him unconditionally all along. He began to spend more time with him, help him on the farm without being asked, and most of all, listen to him with an open heart. One afternoon, while resting under the shade of a tree after a day of work, Samuel broke the silence. "Dad, when I was a child, you used to tell me stories about faith. How did you manage to stay strong all these years?" Don Esteban smiled, his gaze lost in the horizon. "Faith, son, is the only thing that has sustained me. When your mother left, when the harvest was lost during those difficult years, when I felt I had no strength left, I always trusted in God. He has been my refuge and my guide." Samuel felt a lump in his throat. He had never thought about all that his father had endured. He whispered, his voice trembling. "I want to learn to have that faith." Don Esteban placed a hand on his shoulder and said calmly, "Then, my son, pray with me." That afternoon, under that tree, father and son bowed their heads and said a sincere prayer. For the first time in a long time, Samuel felt peace in his heart. From that day on, the relationship between Samuel and his father changed completely. Now, not only did they work together on the farm, but they also shared moments of prayer and reflection. Samuel began reading the Bible with Don Esteban, and little by little, his heart was filled with the same faith that had sustained his father for so many years. One day, while walking toward the village to buy supplies, Samuel saw a young man arguing with his own father. The words were harsh, full of resentment and anger, similar to the ones he had spoken before. Samuel felt a pain in his chest and remembered his dream. He approached the young man and, with a calm voice, said, "Don't waste the time you have with your father. What you see today as demands, tomorrow you'll remember as love." The young man looked at him, surprised, but said nothing. He simply lowered his gaze and seemed to reflect on his words. Don Esteban, proud, placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "God has worked in you, son. Now you understand the value of a father." Samuel nodded, moved. That night, while having dinner together, Samuel took his father's hand and said sincerely, "Dad, thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for teaching me to love and trust in God." Don Esteban smiled, and in his gaze shone the satisfaction of a father who, with patience and love, had fulfilled his mission. Time passed, and Samuel continued walking the path of faith. Every day he learned something new from his father, not just with words but with his example. Don Esteban was not a man of grand speeches, but his life itself was a testament to God's love and faithfulness. One afternoon, while sharing a simple meal, Don Esteban took Samuel's hand affectionately. "Son, I want you to remember something," he said with a slow voice. "I won't be here forever, but my love and my teachings will live in you. The best way to honor a father is by living with righteousness and faith." Samuel felt a lump in his throat. Thinking about his father's absence was painful, but he knew that moment would come someday. "I don't want to lose you, Dad," he whispered, his eyes filled with tears. Don Esteban smiled tenderly. "You won't lose me, son. When my time comes, I'll be in the presence of the Lord, and one day we will be reunited. Until then, live with gratitude and never stop trusting in God." Samuel hugged his father tightly, understanding that true love doesn't die but transcends beyond time and distance. That night, he said a prayer to God, not to ask for anything but to give thanks. Thanking God for his father, for his teachings, and for allowing him to realize, before it was too late, the treasure he had by his side. Years passed, and just as Don Esteban had said, his time on earth came to an end. Samuel was by his side until his last breath, holding his hand and praying with him. There were no words of farewell filled with sadness, but words of hope, because both knew it was not a final goodbye but a see you later in eternity. On the day of the funeral, Samuel stood before the gathered people, and with a firm yet moved voice, he said, "My father was the best gift God ever gave me. For a long time I didn't value him, but the Lord allowed me to open my eyes in time. Today, I don't say goodbye with sorrow, but with gratitude, because I know his legacy lives in me and that we will see each other again." After that day, Samuel honored his father's memory by following his example. He became a man of faith, work, and unshakable love. He helped the needy, advised young people, and taught others what he had learned himself: that a father is a treasure that should be valued every day. Each night, before going to sleep, Samuel would say a prayer to the heavens. "Thank you, Lord, for the greatest gift you gave me, a father who taught me to love you and live with faith." And in his heart, he felt that Don Esteban, from the presence of God, was smiling with pride.